Will the senator withhold his request?
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm going to talk just for a few minutes this evening about my people in Louisiana. They are hurting. Inflation is gutting them like a fish. Disinflation, like all inflation, is man-made. And that man's name is President Joe Biden. President Biden has proven to be an inflation machine. He has spent trillions and trillions of dollars that we do not have. He has injected so much money into this economy that we are practically drowning in liquidity. And unless you were in the quad playing Frisbee during Econ 101, you know that inevitably that is going to cause inflation. And indeed it did. Now, I realize there is a yawning disconnect between what President Biden says and what my people in Louisiana are experiencing. There is. President Biden says that the economy is just fine. He says the economy is just wonderful. And I'll tell you what my people say. My people say, with respect, Mr. President, you need to put down the bong. Because in our state, we are paying more to live worse. And we're not going to be able to retire because of you, Mr. President, until 4 years after we're dead. Louisiana is not a wealthy state, Mr. President. Our median household income is about $58,000. That's mom and dad both working, 2 children. $58,000. It's about $4,800 a month. President Biden's inflation is costing my people an extra $900 a month. That's not a year. $900 a month. $11,000 a year. My average family's making, once again, $58,000 a year. They've got to find, all of a sudden, an extra $11,000 a year. Since President Biden has been president, his inflation has caused the average family in Louisiana an extra $22,000. You don't have to take my word for it. You can see this chart. You don't have to be a senior at Caltech to see that the direction is up. And these extra costs were caused by inflation. The prices of consumer goods in my state, on average, are up 20% since President Biden took office. Some are up a lot more. Some are up a little less. But the average is 20%. Credit card debt is up 46%. The average credit card balance in Louisiana is now $5,800. When you're making $58,000 a year for a family of 4, $5,800 is a lot. Delinquent credit card debt is up 11%, the highest in 12 years. We have had a record number of people who have had to take early withdrawals from their retirement accounts, Mr. President. The average electricity bill in Louisiana is up 28% since President Biden took office. Gasoline in Louisiana up 53%. eggs 69%, bread 28%, coffee 28%, rice 29%, flour 30%, milk 15%, ice cream 22%, chicken per pound 27%. If you're a mom and dad and you're both working and you have maybe 2 car notes, certainly 1 car note, and a mortgage and 2 children, how can you afford this? You can't. When you group these necessities that I'm just talked about by category, what you see is that on average, for my people in Louisiana, again, we're not a wealthy state, food is up 21% on average. Housing is up 290%. Clothing is up 11%. Used cars and trucks are up 21%. New cars and trucks are up 19%. And mortgage rates are up a breathtaking 156%. Now, President Biden has said, truthfully, and I agree with him on this, and I'm very happy that it happened, that inflation is coming down, and it is. But let me tell you the difference between inflation and prices. When inflation starts to go down, we call that disinflation. That doesn't mean prices are falling. That just means that prices are going up less quickly. At one point, we were experiencing 9% inflation. Prices were going up an average of 9% a year. Now it's somewhere in the 2 to 3.5% range. That means that prices are only going up 2 to 3% a year. Again, that doesn't mean prices are falling. That just means they're going up less quickly. That's a long-winded way of saying that disinflation, which I just described, is very different from deflation. Deflation is when prices fall. And these prices, the president leaves this part out. These prices, I'm sad to say, are permanent. They may not go up anymore if we can get inflation down to roughly 1 to 2%. But the higher prices are still permanent. And don't take my word for it. I can refer you to the testimony of both Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell, who both testified in the banking committee on which I sit. These prices are permanent. Mr. President, my people are really getting good. They're really getting good at barely getting by. And it hurts. It hurts deeply. President Biden's inflation in my state is a cancer on the American dream. And it didn't have to be this way. We tried to tell him. That if not only we, when I say many of my Republican colleagues, many of my Democratic friends did as well. Jason Furman, economic advisor to President Obama. I remember clearly, Dr. Furman, now at Harvard, said, with all due respect, Mr. President, you spend this kind of money, you're going to have inflation, and we did. And the worst part of this is that President Biden has no plan to get it down. None. And I regret to say, but I think the only place that we're going to find economic sanity in our country again is in the voting booth. Thank you, Mr. President. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.